Hello everybody, you're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. This is the weekly radio show where we chat about the local arts news. We have a different guest on each week. We head over to the Rhylight Zone for a short story and or some poetry. We catch up with Twangling Jack Ford in the Ilk Shed for a weekly album review, and we play local, unsigned and or independent music. As always, you can reach out to me here at the studio by dropping me an email on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. And I'm particularly keen to hear from poets, performers, musicians, anybody with MP3s to share, local arts news. Don't hesitate to get in touch. You can also find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. And we're repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. So this week we are doing a little bit of a highlight show, but before we do that, we're going to head over to the Rhylight Zone for the latest instalment of Formerly, the rise and fall of a social network. I believe, if I've planned this out right, this is actually the last instalment of this, which is good because we have a bunch of submissions from other people for the Rhylight Zone to get back to. But yes, Formerly, the rise and fall of a social network by myself, Dane Cobain.
Chapter 26. Something about Nate's death didn't sit right with me. I felt like I owed it to him to finish his work. So I tried, as best as I could, to continue the investigation. I went over my notes with a highlighter and started to pick out any inconsistencies, but I didn't really know what I was looking for or how I might know when I found it, so it was a long, tedious process. I can't say I ever liked the guy, but I am a big believer in justice. I was never friends with Nate like I was with Kerry and Abby, but I did respect him in a way. I felt like I owed it to him to find out the truth, if I could. 2 days later, it all kicked off again. I heard a commotion in the kitchen, so I went to find out what was happening. It turned out that Flick and Peter were being held apart by some of our junior staffers, and the air was black with. I walked over to John, who was watching it like a reality TV show, and I asked him what was happening. "Oh, that," he said, without looking away. "I have no idea." And then he asked me something that really tested my loyalties. "Dan, you're going to have to get her out of here," he said. "Get her outside before she causes any more damage." I looked at him aghast. "Can't you get Niels to do it?" I asked. "Isn't that what you pay him for?" John laughed. "I pay him for a lot of things," he said. "And I pay you for a lot of things too. So get her out of here. I want her gone, and I want you to do it." On. This was from Flick, who was, for the moment, restrained. She turned her eyes from Peter to John like a missile locking onto its target. Then her shoulders sagged, and Niels' men relaxed their grip. "Okay," Flick said. "Whatever. I'm done with this place. For good. Good luck holding it." She stormed off towards the exit, and we just stood there and watched her. I was about to go after her anyway to see if she was okay, when John grabbed my arm and leant over to whisper in my ear. "You follow her out, Dan," he said. "Make sure she leaves the building. For good." "But just do it, Dan, if you value your job." Flick's career at Formerly was over, and as the days and weeks began to melt away, we started to realise she was gone for good. I felt terrible, like I'd betrayed her. It hurt most when she asked me to pack her stuff into bags and drop it off to her, so she could ship it back to the UK. I wanted to join her, but I couldn't. There was still so much to do. I just needed to hold on until the IPO. If all went well, we'd both be rich, and if it didn't, I had a backup plan. John and Peter were going to pay up, one way or another. Meanwhile, Elaine had been hard at work, trying to build a global finance department from scratch. In China, we had 3 regional offices, and Chinese was the most widely spoken language on the service. We didn't release that information to the press of the Western world, though. They'd caused enough trouble already. Flick wasn't the only casualty that week. 2 days later, John and Peter summoned the team to make an announcement. We were all so busy that most of us brought our laptops, but the founders didn't care. As long as we were there and semi-listening, I guess it was good enough. John kicked things off by thanking everyone for coming and launching into a brief presentation on the company's financials, with Elaine joining him towards the end to go over a few tricky figures. "As you know," he said, "we're gearing up for our impending IPO. Many of our employees will become millionaires overnight thanks to the shares that they hold, and many others will be well on their way." John paused and scratched his nose before continuing. "Now, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Elaine for all of the hard work that she's been doing. She's created a finance department from scratch, stopped us from going bankrupt, and helped us to navigate our way towards becoming a publicly traded company. In fact, Elaine is so efficient that the vast majority of her work can now be automated. Can we get a round of applause?" We acquiesced, and he waited for the noise to die down again. "Well," he said, "now that we no longer need you, Elaine, you're fired. Thanks for your..." I was worried about a lot of things. The founders were acting more eccentric than ever, security was on lockdown, and Niels and his men had doubled up patrols and taken on new recruits. There was a feeling in the air, like an electrical storm about to happen. I didn't hear about the accident until 2 weeks later. Elaine had travelled back to the UK and settled easily into her old life. That is, until a truck driver ploughed into the back of her sedan, killing her instantly. Luckily, the press didn't cotton on to her connection with the company, and so she passed away unnoticed. But I thought I knew the truth, at last. Unfortunately, I didn't have any proof. I needed some time to think, and I found myself idly cruising the streets of Palo Alto with nowhere to go but home. I thought I was driving at random, but I soon realised that I was heading towards the coffee shop where I used to meet Nate for his reports. Inside, I ordered myself a cappuccino and took a seat in the corner to be left alone with my thoughts. I'd brought my notebook along, but I spent the first hour sketching and colouring in the gaps between the lines. I got up to get a refill, and someone took the opportunity to steal my seat. I scanned the room for somewhere else to sit, and inspiration hit me square in the face like Elaine's airbag. I was supposed to meet Nate on the same day that he died, and we always sat in the same place. It gave me an idea. A couple of guys were already sitting there, but they paid me no mind when I got down on my hands and knees and started rooting around on the floor. Even if they'd sat and stared, it wouldn't have stopped me. Nothing ever does when I'm onto something. I scanned around beneath the tablecloth and saw something which would change my life. A manila envelope was taped to the underside of the table, and it had a name on it. My name. I left without drinking my coffee and drove around again to make sure I wasn't being followed before parking in an alleyway to inspect my prize. It was from Nate, and it was a treasure trove. He had everything. Printouts, photocopies, receipts, signatures, and a flash drive with God knows what else on it. I flicked through it quickly and then took another look in more detail. This was it. It was Nate's entire case, and he'd done a much better job of it than I had. I couldn't even begin to imagine how he'd found all this stuff. Perhaps most damning of all were the early documents, handwritten by the two founders on the pages of a sketchbook. It outlined it all. Their plan to create publicity by killing prominent users, and to ensure their own safety by keeping their team of killers close at hand, in the form of Niels and his security personnel. There were no records of individual killings, or even of anything that could incriminate the founders for anything more than a twisted imagination, but it was still something that the police would want to see. I should have given them the documents. I don't know why I didn't. Probably because I didn't trust them. I never had, ever since I was a kid and I got picked up for a couple of mild misdemeanors. But I didn't trust the founders either, especially now that I had a little extra evidence. It might not stand up in court, but it was good enough for me. Either way, I had a choice to make. Looking back, I guess you could say I chose badly. With my mind made up, I stopped by an internet cafe to make scans and photocopies, and then mailed them to as many addresses as I could remember. I didn't include a note or any indication as to what it was or who it was from. They wouldn't arrive until after the IPO, and by then I'd be long gone. After that, I stashed the originals in a safety deposit box and drove back to the office. It was unusually cool for that time of year, and the roads were empty, so I made good time, parked up, said hi to the guys and headed into my room. I loaded up my laptop, typed out a quick email and hit the send button, and then passed out on my bed with my clothes on. I woke up to a heavy knock at the door. Niels and his men were standing outside, cradling their firearms with determined looks in their eyes. The security team marched me down a passage round the back of the boardroom and through a pair of double doors that I'd never been through. They were always locked and under armed guard. I quickly realised that I was inside the founder's private quarters, a rare honour. Niels escorted me into a small sitting room and gestured for me to take a seat. With no alternative, I complied and waited until the two founders were ushered into the room. They stared at me for a second and then turned to Niels and asked him to leave. "Are you sure?" he asked, waving his weapon towards me. "I'm sure," John said, smiling calmly. "I don't think he'll be any trouble. Isn't that right, Dan?" I nodded. Niels left the room, and an uneasy silence descended. John and Peter stood opposite me with their arms crossed. "Right," said John. "Let's get started, shall we? You know, and we know, so let's drop." "What's next?" "Answers," I said. "I want to know why you did it." "Did what?" "Did you not see the email?" I asked. "I've got you guys banged to rights." John laughed and Peter took over. "Of course we saw the email," he said. "But you can't prove anything." "Sounds like it's your word against ours." "Perhaps," I replied. "But then again, perhaps not. You don't need proof to destroy a reputation. Did Flick teach you nothing? What do you think the media will make of it?" "You're bluffing," John said, but the colour of his face betrayed him. "Want to bet?" I asked. "Why did you do it?" John sighed and rubbed his eyes. "That's a complicated question, Dan. Most of the time we had to. Some of the time we wanted to. And besides, Flick always told us that death sells a story, and we deal in it. What's one more corpse in a world of 7 billion people?" You, I said. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to wait until the IPO, cash in my shares, and then I'm out of here. You ought to get out of here too. Your secret won't last forever. The two founders bowed their heads together for a moment and then turned to look at me. How do you know we won't try to stop you? Peter asked. If anything happens to me, Flick has a copy of the files, as do a dozen good friends of mine. If anything happens to me, if my plan goes awry in any way, they'll release them to the media. I guess I'm just hoping that you won't do anything stupid.
That was the latest instalment of Formerly, The Rise and Fall of a Social Network by myself, Dane Cobain, for this week's entry into the Rhylight Zone. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound, and this is Chameleon with It's Not Quite Me Now.
Must be tired, why is it so hard to sleep? Heart on fire, shame the quiet on the street. Out on the corner, lamplight pouring at my feet. Standing a daze, head bowed in defeat. Still in the air, pounding heartbeat. It's not quite me now, but it will be. The clouding of the sun, rooted to the ground, earthly moving ever on. Scared of the dark, water patterns on the glass, hands on the wheel, sensation that lasts. Heavy night air.
That was Wait by Alice Jane, and before that we had Chameleon with It's Not Quite Me Now. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this week we have a highlight show special, and now we're going to go over and catch up with Jasper Thompson, who is a local photographer. Cool. Okay, so obviously I want to talk to you mostly about your photography. We've got a few different things to cover. But in terms of your photography, how long have you been, pursuing photography, and how did you get your start?
So I think I got my first camera when I was like 15, which was just like one of those like point and shoot or whatever, but it did come with me like literally everywhere. And I still have a whole bunch of my photos since then, obviously, because it's all digital. Unfortunately, it got stolen when I was at a nightclub. Like I checked it in with my jacket, and someone in the wardrobe, they took it.
Yeah.
Then it was a couple of years, I think, before I got another one, but then I got a DSLR. I got a Nikon D60 or something. But yeah, no, so it's been going on for more than half my life. I mean, I'm 34 now, so
awesome.
Yeah, and it's mostly been, I mean, to start off, it was mostly just taking photos with my friends and doing like artistic things. But then my big brother, he was always in bands. So I would take photos of him playing, and then kind of like the setup that you've got at Wickham Art Center, you've got 3 bands playing, right? So like I would come for his band, and then I would take photos of all the others and just approach them afterwards and go like, hey, I've got photos of you. You can have these for free. And if you want to, if you like it, then you can, contact me and we can sort something out.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
And I'm going to cover that in a little bit as well. But so you mentioned the camera that you got. And one of the questions I wanted to ask is like, what gear do you have? What do you use in terms of, I guess, both hardware and like any software that you use?
Yeah. So now I've got a Canon ATD. Yes, a Canon ATD. The main lens that I use is a Sigma 30mm. Just a basic lens, mainly because it lets in so much light if I need it. And then I've got a Canon zoom lens as well, just a basic 70-300, which I use when I just want a little bit more depth. Those are really the main things that I use. I do have a couple of other small lenses, but I've not used them in a very long time, and I just it's kind of getting to the point where should I really keep hold of them? Like they're just taking up space and weight in my bag. But I'm one of those people that I'll come in handy someday.
Yeah. You never know, do you? And it's better to have them and not need them than to need them and not have them.
Exactly. And then I've got a tripod that I use every once in a while, and a flash that I do need to learn more how to use, like, because I know how to use it, but it's like every time I do take it out, it's sort of a learning process every time, so I just end up not using it. And software wise, it's literally just Lightroom at this point in time. So it's I just tune up any the lights and the darks and color balances and things like that is mostly what I tend to do.
That was a highlight of our chat with local photographer Jasper Thompson, and this is part of what we chatted about with Amanda Byrd. But I suppose again with your books, I mean, that's one of the nice things of having a series is, if you can get people into one of the books, then hopefully they'll read through.
Hopefully, yeah. That's the goal.
Is your series like, because you kind of mentioned there, I suppose, individual reasons for murder, but is it one where you can dip into any book in the series, or do you need to read them chronologically?
So you can definitely pick up anywhere. She has a tendency to spot her next kill at the end of the previous book. So you're gonna want to go back and read everything. Like, especially if you pick up book 7, you're going to be like, okay, what is going on here? I absolutely have to know what got her to this point. So it's fun. I mean, but you could totally pick it up wherever. I've had people pick up book 4 and they're like, oh, now I need to read it all. So then they go back and, binge 1 through 3. So
cool. And you described yourself as a character killer and a human remains director. What are the best things about your job?
The best things about my job is probably legally getting away with murder.
Yeah.
And I get to be super creative about it. Like in the beginning, it started off with kind of different disposal methods, and now she's got everything down, and she's like, okay, this is great. I know what I'm doing. And then she's got like her loves, like she's got a knife that she loves. She's got a couple guns, one of which is her favorite.
Yeah.
She's It's just super fun to like kind of inject things or to, oh, look, I need to look this up and figure out how this works in real life. You know, how many pigs does it take a person or to eat a person and
Yeah.
how long does it take? Fun fact, it's a week for
Oh, cool.
2 pigs.
Nice. Awesome.
It's about a week for
I have
2
wondered
pigs.
that, yeah.
I have done the research.
Mm.
So yeah, it's fun because it takes you into, especially over here in the States, it takes you very firmly into NSA watch territory.
Yeah, I was going to say it's one of those things. It's that old cliche of the writer having the very incriminating Google searches.
Yes. Yes. Like some people are like, when I die, delete my search history. And
Yeah.
I'm like, nah, man, don't delete my search history. It's hilarious.
That's funny. I had the exact same thing. I did a interview for someone's blog, and they said that like, when you die, what do you think people, or what you're going to do about your search history? And I was like, oh, just leave it up there. It'll confuse them. It'll be great.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, I have searched chloroform and
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was for. But then I found out that way, way, way back when in the early 1900s, they actually used chloroform to clean red wine out of white carpets.
Nice.
It's like, so is that before or after the chloroform knocks you out?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, because the thing about chloroform is, so I've read about that, and it takes like 8 minutes to take effect or something. So it's like when you see people in movies, they put the rag of chloroform on, they go straight down. That's not how it works. And now every time I see that in a book, it really winds me up. The other one is I saw on Mythbusters, they did a test where they had like their dummies or whatever. Because you see in movies, people get shot and they go flying backwards. But that doesn't actually happen. Yeah, that's not how it works. And so when you see that happening in a book, you can tell the reader is they're a visual writer or whatever, and they're basing that on something they've seen in the film. That was the highlight of our chat with Amanda Byrd. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is Mika England.
Don't give me reality. I'll shed my skin. You only react to a scream. Alright then, I'll begin. You wouldn't give me the time of day. In actuality, well, anyway, I'll become pixels on your screen, your zeros and ones. Friends, company. Oh, you don't seem to miss it. That damn cell phone screen. You don't seem to resist it. Come on, darling, touch me. Swipe right with your fingertips. Our lives are controlled now through silicone chips. Those goddamn zeros and ones. Those goddamn zeros and ones. Look up, I'm right here. Look up, I'm right here. We've all become zeros and ones and zeros, villains and heroes. We've all become zeros and ones, ones and zeros, villains and heroes. Look up, I'm right here. Look up, I'm right here. There's got to be some kind of trick, because it's like living in the Matrix, isn't it?
You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. And this week we have a highlight show special, so we're going to go straight over now to a highlight of our chat with poet Chris Campbell.
Cool. Well, yeah, I thought it was her because I'd got a note to ask about her, and then you mentioned being Welsh as well, and I was like, well, Evans is a good Welsh surname, so it probably is her. But I wanted to ask you about the illustrations in general. How do you think the illustrations sort of work alongside your poems to bring them to life?
Yeah, I think it's really exciting when you chat to an illustrator and then send them. I mean, it helps if you know them well. But if you send them kind of a bunch of poems, and then when you're kind of waiting to see how they'll interpret them, how they'll do them. It's a real it's a really sort of interesting feeling. And I tried to, when I was talking with them beforehand, I tried not to go into too much detail about the poem, because I wanted them to kind of interpret it in their own way. I didn't want to, I don't know, dictate in any way, but their sort of their thought process around it. I mean, it was great. I think with my first book, there might have been a couple that we changed it slightly, but I think that the poems in that first book are a little bit more difficult to interpret, I suppose. Whereas White Eye the Needle last year was very much around lockdown and nature and relationships and that kind of thing. And Sandra just illustrated the poems beautifully. Even, sort of mention of, I was living in Nottingham at the time and living opposite a canal, and she did her research, and her illustration of the canal opposite us was, it was kind of almost as if you were walking along it. I was really impressed, and I think my latest collection, there's more poems in there. There's no illustrations, and I'm really happy with it. And I don't think you need an illustration to bring out a poem. The poem should be able to do that on its own. But I think with certain poems and certain books, it works nicely, and it can really add to a book. Add to someone's experience of reading your book, and encourage them to come back to it more.
That was a highlight of our chat with poet Chris Campbell, and now we're going to head over to catch up with Laura Stone. And what about some of the feedback that you got? What's some of the nicest bits of feedback you've received? Because you must have had some nice comments from, again, people who can't sleep, or you've helped them through tough times in life and all that kind of stuff.
I get a lot of comments. I do get a few trolls, a bit nasty now and again, but we'll not think of that. But positive comments that they really make my day, and they make it worthwhile. People say, that they've been having a panic attack and I've helped them through it. Or someone the other day said they had a really bad migraine headache, and my video kind of helped them to relax so much that it took away the headache, which is, you know, amazing. Once again, yeah, if they can't sleep, and it helps them sleep, and just, you know, in general, makes them smile, makes them relax, chills them out, you know, especially after a stressful day at work or whatever. And it's just a nice way of helping people.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, a really nice way to put it, a nice way of helping people, and you're kind of bringing a bit of good into the world, and it strikes me as that's something that you try and do throughout your life in general. You know, you always seem to be an approachable and like supportive person of people. I know, I'm going to give you a big ego.
You know, the way I look at it, Dane, is there's so many negative people in the world. If I can be one of the positives and help others in any way, even if it's a small way, I'm happy with that, and I'll carry on doing it. So it's all good.
Awesome, cool. And so what inspired you to create an ASMR YouTube channel?
So I started watching ASMR videos, and these people that I watching were helping me so much. I get anxiety, I was having problems sleeping, and I just thought, these people are helping me. I wish I could help other people. I didn't know anything. I'm not very tech savvy, as you know. But I had my little laptop and my webcam, and just kind of sat there and started doing videos, and then they got views and subscribers. It went up and up, and it was just, it's kind of started there. It's been going. I've done my channel for like nearly, I think it's about 9 years now.
Wow, yeah.
So it's a long time, but I love it, you know, in general, mostly.
That was a highlight of our chat with YouTuber and ASMR artist Laura Stone, and this is part of what we talked to about / with musician Charlie Brind. And I wanted to ask you about equipment. So it sounds as though, as you say, you've kind of downscaled a bit to just acoustic, really. But what's some of the equipment that you use, and maybe can you take us through like one of your big old rigs from back in the day when you had all of the gear?
Oh yeah, okay. We'll start going from back in the day. So I was a big Machine Head fan. So I had to go out and get the PV5150, the old Van Halen thing. I had like a couple of 4B12s, the PV stack, using a lot of Boss pedals, but mainly using the distortion of the actual amp itself, sort of thing. But tried all weird and wonderful sounds that actually don't fit into a song at all, but you just want to use it for the effect for one cool moment in a song or something.
Yeah.
Had a Gibson Epiphone Spotlight, which was the release that PRS had got in that legal battle with Gibson over.
Right.
So that's been in the guitar case for a while now, unfortunately. But I'm still keeping it. I'm never going to get rid of it. But unfortunately, all the amps and most of all the hardware had to go, just because life sort of said there's not enough room for that. Everything else. So, but now sort of left with my acoustics basically. So still play my Taylor Big Baby, which was my first sort of startup guitar, little travel size. Still my go-to guitar for writing because it's such an easy neck to play. I've got, for recording, I use either my Yamaha AC3M, it's like an all mahogany body, or my Taylor 2 Series Deluxe, which is one I've been saving up for many years. And it's really nice to play, but with anything like that, you tend to not play it as much as you should because you're scared of scratching it. But you know every guitar is going to get a ding at some point. It's just how long I can delay it, really. So cool. Still stick with my Boss pedals, reverb and OC5, just to give the bottom end a bit of lift in the acoustic.
Cool. That was a highlight of our chat with musician Charlie Brind, and this is part of what I talked to Daffyd from the band Chameleon about. And that reminds me a bit, kind of coming back to that first question where you were talking about Tolkien and like folklore. And it's kind of similar to that, where like you have a folk tale and it changes with every retelling of it, but it's still the same story. It's kind of like an organic living thing. And I suppose kind of the same is true of your songs, right? They're kind of like alive in a way.
Well, that's it. I think that's definitely it. It's kind of it's being able to tell it in a different version every time. And there's always that's what's fun about it. That's why we do it. Is that you've got that kind of that freedom. And if it's a bad night or an indifferent night, then it doesn't matter. You know, and it's quite the same way. And it doesn't matter who you're playing to, because if the audience aren't into it, if they're not reacting the way you kind of want them to, then it's fine, because it's kind of like, well, we'll just chat between ourselves, basically. It's kind of it's that's how we like to do it.
Cool. And like, this is probably going to be a difficult one for you to answer, but how would you describe your sound?
Oh, that is. Well, yeah, I've been having a bit of a sort of a ponder of that with trying to promote the band. Because I suppose it's sort of funky is how I describe the band, but not in because personally I'm not a huge fan of funk music.
Yeah.
But I like funk music, but I wouldn't go out my way to listen to it. Whereas the other guys in the band, like my brother's a bit more as a bass player.
Yeah.
He likes that kind of thing a lot more. But it's kind of it's keeping that kind of bounce to it, you know, trying to keep it lively enough so that you can there's like a swing to it.
Yeah.
But obviously it doesn't really answer anyone's question when they want like a definitive answer. You know, when you look at a list, when you're filling out an application for a festival and it's like, what genre are you? And you go down the list, it's like, well, I'm none of those things.
Yeah.
Or because, you know, I've said that we're a blues band, but we're not a blues band because we don't do that thing.
Yeah.
And then we're not a soul band because we don't do that thing either necessarily. But we take elements from all these things.
Yeah.
And then we're not a jazz band because we don't do jazz, but although we've, you know, got an element of that maybe.
Yeah.
And then calling ourselves a jam band, which is, you know, in America that makes sense because that as a genre exists.
Yeah.
Whereas over here, it's only certain people who would understand what that means, kind of thing.
Yeah. That was the highlight of our chat with Daffyd from Chameleon. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is So Long Space Girl with Here's to Romance.
souls and feed it to the wolves. Broken reality is waiting to be old. Stuck in this moment of madness, frozen in the moment of truth. Is life all about choices? We could take the world and give back what we've sown. But I can't help you if you obey. Screw about yourselves and feed it to the wolves. Broken reality awaits to be broken heart I cannot fix, but I get over it. I'll never stand in your way, and I will break your
That was Broken Reality by Umar Ara, and before that we had Here's to Romance by So Long Space Girl. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host Dane Cobain, and it's time now for us to head over to the Ilkshed to catch up with Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review.
Brian Eno, Taking Tiger Mountain by Strategy. When Roxy Music first appeared with their strange, haunting first album, their glam image that was somehow both 1950s and futuristic, and their hit single Virginia Plain, they achieved the almost unachievable feat of being like nothing ever seen or heard before. Essentially, they were a fairly standard rock band, bass, drum, guitar, piano and sax, but what set them apart was the non-musical contribution of Brian Eno. Eno added nothing to the harmony and little in the way of melody, and his bubbling and whooshing synth noises were not that unusual at the time. But what he did do was shape the sound of the band, affecting both the guitar and sax. His early solo albums were nowhere near as experimental as you would expect. Taking Tiger Mountain by Strategy was his second solo album. The songs are surprisingly un-rock and roll and quite English. in a sea shanty, music hall, poppy, folk music, children's lullaby, schoolyards, chanting kind of way. They have intriguing and sometimes amusing lyrics, and are sung in a sing-song fashion with little vocal affectation. It is generally upbeat, and in places it is quite uplifting. It is not so much glam rock as it is Syd Barrett type 60s psychedelia, more tie-dye than eyeliner. Maybe some of the album could be the offspring of The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, though the track The Third Uncle could be the great uncle of post-punk, especially Wire, Joy Division and Bauhaus, who actually did a cover of it. Brian Eno at the time was associated with the Portsmouth Symphonia, an orchestra of amateurs who could barely play at all, let alone play in tune. On this album, Eno uses both the Portsmouth Symphonia and Robert Wyatt to add soothing, tuneless texture. The tune they appear on is so light and breezy that it probably needed a bit of dissonance to give it substance and a bit of weight to hold it down. One of those things which should not work and probably would not work for anyone apart from Eno. Brian Eno went on to make 2 further well-acclaimed solo albums and albums of ambient music, but he has been more notable as a producer and collaborator, working with David Bowie on his Low and Heroes albums, and with U2, Talking Heads and Coldplay. A short piece by Eno was played multiple times every day the whole world over when it was used as the startup sound for Windows 95. He has also had music used in films and as TV themes. Brian Eno, Taking Tiger Mountain by Strategy.
Big thank you to Twangly Jack Ford for this week's album review. Thank you to everyone whose music I've shared, to all of the people whose highlights I shared. As always, you can find us on Facebook if you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound. You can reach out to me here at the studio on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk, which is dane.cobain @wickhamsound.org.uk. I particularly want to hear from poets, performers, musicians, etc. We're repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen again. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. So I'm going to love you and leave you for this week. This is one last tune. This is Jazz Dillon featuring Henny Envy with Get On Your Boots. I'll catch you next week.
beautiful when the sun shines in the